Greetings, everyone. My name's Roberto Mucaro Borrero, and I want to welcome you to this webinar. We're going to begin in just a moment. We're just finalizing some of our documentation here. And in order to begin this properly, as we have attendees coming in, I was asked to start the webinar off with a prayer. So I will share this opening song in my own indigenous language, my Taino language, and basically calling in the spirits of the directions to provide us support for our gathering today. So I thank you for your patience. Oh, kama watukan kemi. Oh, kama watukan kemi. Ariko, ariko, semi achiano. Ariko, ariko, semi rakuno. Ariko, ariko, semi sobaiko. Ariko, ariko, baba yokaho. Ariko, ariko, bibi atabeira. Bomatungwa tukan semi. Bomatungwa tukan semi. Katu. Maburika, Ipiaono, thank you, relatives, for your patience. And now I will introduce Saul Vicente, who will be one of the moderators for today's program. And he will describe what's going to be going on next. For those who are interested, we have interpretation available today, and you can see the instructions for interpretation now being shared in the webinar chat. Thank you very much. And Saul, you have the floor.
Padiusi bichaka bizanaka. Diuski seguirá si se turuni Virginia tuyana girari chiwinudija. Lu dirani kasakalu dani skijinu. Ne si modo ngasanda kukalu no tiganda chugenda nasaka negenda na yechendani kaskijinu. Diuski se pelatu bichana bizanaka. Muy buenos días, hermanas y hermanos. Es saludado en mi originaria zapoteco.
I agree.
A todas y todos ustedes por su presencia en esta reunión.
Have you all here for your presence here in this meeting.
Presentando una agenda para abordar los diferentes temas que tenemos que
address
gracias a todas y todos
that affect us. So thank you all.
Participar en esta octava reunión del Foro Internacional de los Pueblos Indígenas por la Soberanía Alimentaria.
Indigenous.
En esta ocasión vamos a compartir información para facilitar.
We're having issues with Jimmy's mic in the interpretation. There is some breaking up of Jimmy's interpretation.
Let me change some settings. Rebecca, can you take over?
I apologize, everyone. We just want to make sure that everyone can understand what's going on. We do have multiple language interpretation today, so you just have to go down to the interpretation icon and pick the language that you would like to hear the webinar in. I apologize to Saul for this delay. Rebecca, are you ready? Okay. Saul, disculpe.
Son estos problemitas técnicos que se presentan, pero nada que no se pueda arreglar. Muchas gracias. Pues les decía, el propósito en esta... solo que yo escucho Yo escucho la interpretación también.
Yes, I'm just hearing Saul and not Rebecca.
Ahora, here we go. Yes,
There you
we're
go.
ready. Sorry.
Okay, everyone, we apologize, but we're
Sorry.
Thank you. Okay, Saul.
Adelante.
Gracias. El propósito, entonces,
The purpose, as I was saying, of this occasion is to share information and to really facilitate this interactive dialogue on strategies that we want to carry out to strengthen the participation of Indigenous peoples from different UN bodies that deal with different aspects that have to do with food sovereignty and the right to food. And I thank all of you for being here, and I give you a most cordial welcome, and especially to my colleagues and my co-coordinators, Anders Oskal and Janine Yazi. Thank you for being with us here today. And you all have the agenda for today. And there are many different topics that we're going to discuss today, but we will really be able to update you on some topics that we have been dealing with, and also the different topics that have to do with the right to food, our struggle for food sovereignty from the work that we are doing at the FAO and the Committee of Fisheries and other spaces, as well as the relationship that we have with other social movements on behalf of food sovereignty, and some of the current meetings that we've had. We will give some updates on them, such as the UN climate change body, SBST or SBSTA 58, and also some of the results that we had during the participation on the World Conference on Water, and also the work that we have been carrying out on the topics on the updates on the Code of Conduct for Pesticides. And we thank Gubagan from FAO for all the work that he has done in the opening of different spaces so that we could participate to do this work, and also for your presence here. This is really important to hear about these recent updates and amendments to the International Code of Conduct on Pesticides, and also to tell you about the upcoming events like the 6th conference on international conference on corn, and also on caribou conference that we'll hear about, and also the strategies that we need to carry on for our work in favor of food sovereignty and our right to food and water. These are some of the topics that we will be discussing today. And having said this, I want to say that ask if our sister Tsutohil from the Consejo Otlapul is here with us. I'd like to know if our sister is here from the Consejo Nacional Otlapul Ashpop, Andrea Roche, our Mayan sister. Is she here with us yet? You have the floor if you are here, so that you can give us the ceremony for the opening presentation. Can you please give the floor to our sister Roche, Andrea Roche? Our sister, can you please go ahead?
I'm not seeing her. Can you tell me what she signed in with here? Because I don't see her name under the attendees list.
We can work with Juan and Dionisio to see that. Let's go ahead, I think,
Yeah.
and then we can bring her on as soon as we figure out how to do that. Thank you.
Está escrita como Juan
No,
Leo.
no sé cómo está registrada.
Okay, yo veo que hay dos.
I
Juan.
wouldn't know how to tell you how she's registered. I do believe she is now with us. Roberto, in the chat, it says that she's enrolled or she's registered as Juan Leon.
Yes, I apologize, everyone. We're just trying to, I've added both Juan Leon presenters to the panelists. So so she can speak if she begins speaking. There's two Juan Leons now added as presenters. So either one of those can begin to speak.
Gracias, adelante.
Yes, please go ahead. You have the floor.
Yo creo que me han dado micrófono a mí. Por favor, denle al otro Juan León. Ahí está, yeah.
Yes, you gave the microphone to me. Please give it to the other Juan Leon. Go ahead, sister.
Both are,
Yes,
yes.
go
both are
ahead.
Able to talk. We can't hear her.
Adelante, Andrea Roche.
Antonio Hermana Rapi. Juan León está hablando, pero no se oye. Creo que está diciendo.
No, escuchamos.
Hable usted, compañera.
Por favor, habla.
Dar volumen, ¿sí? Abrir. ¿Ve? Mira, y está activado. Silenciar. Dice. Va, pero está silenciado.
Tú puedes hablar. You could speak. I think we're going to have to move on Saul, because this is she's not, for some reason, she's not understanding that she could speak.
We can come back to her at the end if that's possible. We'll try to get it worked out. We should
Thank you.
continue. Thank you.
De acuerdo. Muchas gracias. Muchísimas gracias. Bueno.
That's fine. Yes, I agree. Thank you. Thank you very much. Then we will now continue our program and to listen, and we will listen to the different brothers and sisters. We are running a little behind, so we will not have much time for questions and answers. And so we would like to ask you all to keep your questions brief, give us your specific questions. And next, we will move forward with the report about the fishing committee with the FAO. We will ask our sister, Rochelle, to give us a report about the worldwide situation on fisheries. Go ahead, 5 minutes, please.
Thank you, Miigwech, Hermano Saul. And I'm pleased to bring everybody back together and launch this webinar for us today. I want to ensure I start my timer. Okay, thank you. Mino Gishigeb. It's a beautiful day, my relatives. I greet you from Anishinaabe lands. I'm calling in from the land of 10,000 lakes, also known as Minnesota, Naga Ichiwanong, or Fond du Lac Reservation. I'm pleased to share with you information on the fisheries work and opportunities to collaborate and get involved from the local level, the ground, all the way up to the international. Thank you for welcoming me. First, I'll share about the UN voluntary guidelines on small-scale fisheries. Please don't be discouraged by the voluntary status of these guidelines. This was a hard fight effort by community fishers and Indigenous peoples. And I'd like to take a moment to acknowledge the efforts of Chief Gary Harrison from Chickaloon Village, who worked very hard on the establishment and adoption of these guidelines as well. The effort came from the ground, pushing a human rights framework. And for Indigenous peoples, this tool, coupled with the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, can be used to further protect our rights on the ground. I will share a link to the COFI website, and also that will give you access to the guidelines, not only in the 6 UN languages, but also an additional 12 to 15 languages, which I will post in the chat. If you are an Indigenous fisher, there are a number of avenues for participation and advocacy at the international level coming up in the next 2 years. First and foremost, next month, the Expert Mechanism on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples, the MRIP, will meet in Geneva and feature a panel on Indigenous peoples fisheries. This panel is meant to feed directly into the Human Rights Council, where we hope to see another panel or sub-events hosted by Human Rights Council on Indigenous peoples fisheries. We also plan to organize an Indigenous-led and organized side events where we welcome fishers from all over the world to come share their stories, collaborate, and form a working group to look towards the next years in securing Indigenous peoples' rights to fisheries. Next year is a really important year as well. It's going to be the 10-year anniversary of these guidelines on the rights of small-scale fishers. And we'll see a lot of events not only coming out of FAO, but multi-regional gatherings and a global gathering that will be for grassroots fishers to prepare for the international meeting. But this will be our own closed space to be able to determine what our priorities are, our advocacy points, and organize how we will continue to work at the grassroots level to ensure that our fisheries and our fishers are protected against commercial interests, against state interests, and most importantly, securing and upholding our treaty rights to fish, or our rights that are guaranteed under the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. The Small Scale Fisheries Summit is truly what we see as the Committee on Fisheries, and we will go in after that with a collective voice. The Committee on Fisheries desperately needs more Indigenous voices. It's the only global intergovernmental forum where FAO members and states meet to review and consider the issues and challenges related to fisheries management. And we know collectively that Indigenous peoples can tend to get left behind in these conversations. We fish for our communities, for our peoples, and as subsistence. And so we have a different take on this. It's important that we show up and share our voices and share our stories from the ground, and ensure that our rights are secured as Indigenous peoples that are fisher folk, which is slightly different than some of the stories that are heard in that arena. So once again, I call on you to please take a look at the websites and potentially make a plan to participate in this. There will be training opportunities for you. And we really, I can't emphasize more how much the Indigenous voice is needed in this space. This is a clickable link, and I will share my slideshow in the chat as well, so that you have this information available to you in your language. We also are starting a fisheries listserv, and we hope that you'll join this. It's a way for us to keep connected, to share stories from on the ground, to share meetings, and to be able to organize in a way where our voices are heard throughout all grassroots, state, national, and UN fora. The IITC will also be launching a sector on the IITC website under the Food Sovereignty tab. Please keep a lookout in the next month for us to launch this, and we will also use that space to keep you updated. With that, that's my time for 5 minutes. I'm here and available throughout the rest of the webinar and by email at any time that's convenient for you to further discuss how you can get involved in international fisheries work, to attend Kofi, but also to lend your voice to the grassroots small-scale fishers movement, which we hope to broaden Indigenous voices. Chimigwich, thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, hermana Rochelle, por esta
Thank
rápida.
you very much, our sister Rochelle, for that brief overview of the important work that's going on related to fisheries and small-scale fisheries and Indigenous peoples. Thank you very much for sharing all of the contact information so that people can direct their questions to you. Also, please check the chat to see if there are any questions for you that you can respond to. So, as we continue with our updates, we will now ask our brother Anna Fraser, who coordinates activities in the Pacific, to give us his report on fisheries from the Pacific region. Anaru, you have the floor. Go ahead.
Hey, kia ora, and thank you to our brother Robert for opening our gathering in our traditional way. Thank you also to our coordinators, Janine, Saul, and Anders, and also to our sister Rochelle for her overview of the fisheries work we're doing. Kia ora, greetings everyone. I'm Anaru Fraser, Food Sovereignty Program Consultant with the International Indian Treaty Council, based here in Aotearoa, New Zealand, which I've been part of for the last 20 years or so. You may recognize me as Māori or an Indigenous person from Aotearoa, but like many of you, we refer ourselves through our tribal identities, our lands, waters, genealogy. And for me, I grew up in a place where the ocean meets the forest. So you could say my identity is informed by the reciprocal relationship we have with our marine relatives. But before I start, I'd like to acknowledge my colleague and our Indigenous sister, Hiniwirangi Kohu Morgan, Vice President of the International Indian Treaty Council, who passed away earlier this year. And along with all our dear Indigenous relations who have returned to our ancestors, may they continue to be with us in spirit as we continue this journey. So part of the current food sovereignty work I'm doing is in the Asia Pacific region, specifically as a member of the Regional Advisory Group for the Asia Pacific region, which is one of 3 regional advisory groups. This regional advisory group is part of a major global civil society and Indigenous peoples network representing small-scale fishers, which includes IATC. We're lucky to have Secretariat assistance from the International Planning Committee, and in particular from our dear friends from Crocevia, based in Roma, Italy, who do a fantastic job keeping us moving. Recently this year in Sri Lanka, we launched the people-centered assessment of the implementation of the voluntary guidelines for securing sustainable small-scale fisheries, as our sister Rochelle just mentioned. This is part of our 2023-2024 strategy, which will include assessments from the African region and Latin America and Caribbean region. Our assessment included case studies from Bangladesh, India, Indonesia, Malaysia, Sri Lanka, and Thailand. While they have their own country-specific issues, such as governance structures, employment, value chains, gender, climate change, and capacity, these are all Indigenous issues in one way, shape, or form. However, An ongoing challenge in the Asia Pacific region is participation from our Pacific relatives who live in big ocean countries throughout the Pacific Ocean. And similar to those of us who live in geographically remote and diverse areas, there are challenges around digital communication and information dissemination. This impacts an ability to be informed, which impacts an ability to participate in a meaningful way. So we always need to be mindful that an Asia Pacific region needs to truly be
Таким образом, мы
representative
понимаем, что нам нужно явное
of our Asia
представительство.
and Pacific relatives. There's still a lot to do, and we look forward to the outcomes and recommendations of the African and Latin American and Caribbean assessments, either later this year or early next year. We then look forward to working together as regional advisory groups to plan how we can best achieve those recommendations. So on behalf of the Regional Advisory Group for Asia Pacific, I'd like to invite our Pacific relatives to join in the work of the advisory group. And please put your details in the chat box that Rochelle mentioned if you're interested, or contact the organizers. And with that, thank you, Modi ora, and good health to everyone.
Muchísimas gracias, mi hermano Anaru Fraser, por esta actualización y este gran
Thank you
trabajo.
very much, Brother Anaru Fraser. And thank you for the update from our brothers of the Pacific. Now we will continue and give the floor to another brother in the fisheries work. And this is someone from the Latin American region. So we will ask Paco Villegas to give an update. Go ahead, Paco.
Good morning. Good morning. So we are here and we're connected and listening to the work that we're doing on fisheries. In September 2022, we had the opportunity for a advisory regional group. We had the opportunity to go to coffee in Rome. So these are very important topics for us. And we consider that during those meetings, we really would need to do some follow-up to these meetings. And so we had some Zoom meetings where Rochelia was the one that was leading these meetings. And the purpose that we had was of great importance. And so this regional advisory group decided to do some very focused work on guidelines, on the voluntary guidelines. And so we've been working on this for about 10 years, and the general consensus is that they have not been implemented. And so now it is our responsibility to do some grassroots work. And that is a topic that we discussed. We had great participation with our brothers and sisters from Ecuador, Brazil, Argentina on the topic of contamination, pollution. And so if as Indigenous peoples, we have, I'm sure, maybe some of us are not faced with extractive industry, but I think a lot of our brothers and sisters are, especially like in Argentina, there's the extractive industry in the small fisheries. So during this meeting that took place in Argentina, so we prepared a declaration, and we will have this for you, Saul and Andrea. We'll send that to you. And so what we really were emphasizing on is that many Indigenous peoples feel that they do not that their lands are being taken over, they're losing their land. So we took this into account. How is it that they can recover their lands and territories? It's not easy to do. Like some of us, we do have our communal land and territory, but what we really liked is that there were so many people that got involved and participated. And so we're also thinking about the environmental problems that so many are suffering, especially from the big industries, how they just get rid of their toxic waste on our lands. And this is a very generalized issue that many of us are facing, not just here in Latin America, but throughout the world. So we also included the participation of the special rapporteur from the United Nations, Marcos Orellana. He visited our people here in the Yaqui Nation, and we visited the Lobos Bay, and we have a huge problem there with the drain collector number 2 in the city of Obregon, where they just put their toxic waste into these drain collectors. But also, annually, they apply pesticides in the Yaqui Valley and other valleys in our area. So there's a lot of really difficult situations where it goes to this drain collector. And Marcos Orellana, he said that they could change the course of that channel so that it wouldn't discharge into the main population's source of drain and it wouldn't affect the fish, because there's so many fish that end up dead and really affect the population in so many ways. And so now I would like to close with the decree that we are very aware of. The President, López Obrador, and it was a decree that he came up with on the use of pesticides. So we're really hoping that this decree from the Mexican government will start in 2024 to help us along this topic. So thank you so much. So thank you. Thank you, Paco. Thank you so much for this important work that you're doing in the region of Latin America, and especially with a special rapporteur of Marcos Orellana. And we will really have to follow up on this topic. Thank you once again. So this was the topic on the presentation of the work that we are doing on the topic of indigenous fisheries with the UNFAO at the regional and international levels, and also in the IPC. Now we're also going to discuss on the food sovereignty topic of the Nyalani process. So I'm going to share with you how we're doing on this Nyalani declaration. But what I want to share with you is how we're getting organized. So I've prepared a short document that I can read to you in 3 or 4 minutes. So it's really about the International Planning Committee for Food Sovereignty. It is a global platform that is autonomous, self-organized, and it is led by global social movements where indigenous peoples, small-scale food producers, consumers, and rural workers participate. And what they aim to do is to advance food sovereignty and its agenda at the regional and global levels. So currently, the IPC is made up of 18 regional and global social movements and networks, and it has more than 6,000 organizations that represent about 300 million people around the world. The global social movements that make up IPC share the principles and the 6 pillars of food sovereignty that you can see in the Nyalani Declaration of 2007. You can see it on their webpage. And IPC also has a group of NGOs that support the allied movements that provide critical analysis and technical expertise. Currently, 27 years ago, we started this path on the struggle for food sovereignty. And 27 years later, we see that our world is really in unprecedented turmoil, and we are facing deeply rooted overlapping crises, which are economical, social, democratic, ecological, health, patriarchal, and racist. And the dominant mindset and its institutions are not capable of providing real solutions. That's why we need urgently systemic and transformative change and support the protagonism of social movements. The IPC members say that we are living, that really this crisis is just going to reinforce the industrial food system that is responsible for the environmental degradation that we have been having to live through. And it will really cause more than 1/3 of the global greenhouse emissions to increase. And this system contributes to the global health crisis, such as COVID-19 pandemic. It causes more poverty, hunger. It floods the world market with junk food linked with things like obesity and diabetes. So we are calling for a paradigm shift that will really reclaim our indigenous food systems as public common domains for the well-being of all, for all the people, all the planet, and that these food systems will really be based on human rights, on the implementation of food sovereignty that would recognize the importance of public policies that would strengthen, that would be inclusive, democratic, and et cetera, in order to have adequate food for all. So now IPC is starting this new edition of the Nyalini process. So we're inviting global networks, movements, organizations to coordinate an intersectional convergence towards a joint proposal for a system change. And through this multi-year process, we plan to organize and bring together hundreds of thousands of people, campesinos, artisanal fisher folk, indigenous peoples, to discuss and present a strong political agenda for food sovereignty and climate justice for the coming years. This really has to do with a huge critical undertaking, and it will involve democratic consultations in regions and territories where the IPC is organized. And the results of this consultation will be presented at the Nyalini Global Forum, and this will be held in 2025 in India, where the hundreds of delegates will come from around the world and will discuss the strategies and solutions for fair, greener food systems in order to counteract the forces that are really pushing the world into a deeper and multidimensional crisis. And for this first step, the IPC members met in Rome in September, and so we decided on the strategic lines of action. And then on the 10th and 11th of June, we met in Rome in order to discuss the IPC Facilitation Committee representations and representatives of other social movements, also the World Forum of People's Health, the World Movement, Social Solidarity, Economy, and many other organizations. And they all committed to food sovereignty. And in this meeting, we had the commitment of different movements where they really agreed to have a steering committee for the Nyalini process to inform their organizations, and they will consult with their different movements and organizations. And in about 2 weeks, they will send the names of their leaders to this steering committee. And for its part, the IPC will promote many actions for the global stock-taking meeting at the Food Systems Summit during Food Week that will be held in Rome in October. So we think that this international forum on food sovereignty and water, we should all be participating in this construction of this initiative if you think that this is appropriate. So this is my participation. Thank you. So now I will continue with the next reports and updates. So now we will go on to discuss the reports that come from the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change on SBSTA 58, where many of us, our brothers and sisters, were there. Onelin Masardule, he's still there, and they were there working for 2 long weeks. So let's see if our brother Ghazali, are you here with us? to share with us the results of the negotiations and key outcomes of Indigenous peoples on loss and damage, Article 6 in preparation for Dubai. Our brother Ghazali, are you with us? You have the floor.
Good afternoon. Good evening. Can people hear me?
Yes, we can.
All right, perfect.
And
Yeah, so I only have 5 minutes and I have to cover Article 6 and loss and damage. So I'll jump right into it. So let me start with the main takeaways from the Bonn Climate Change Conference on the Article 6 carbon markets, as well as the loss and damage conversation that I've had. We as Indigenous people, we had 15 bilaterals and multilateral meetings in 5 days, which is kind of record-breaking on these topics with states and groups of states. There are multiple opportunities for submissions coming up, and countries are open to seek and receive input from Indigenous peoples on matters of Article 6 as well as loss and damage. What is very important to mention is that it's not enough to just participate in SBSTA. So the last 2 weeks in Bonn and just at COP, you will see, or what we are seeing right now is that there's an increasing importance on the work to be done between the two meetings, and so which we call intercessional work. And we as a group work group on Article 6 and loss and damage, we will start engaging with these countries in the intercessional work, and we'll have a meeting in September to assess the SBSTA 58 and preparations for COP28, and there are several deadlines coming up in the in September and October as well. So let me start with Article 6. We'll focus on 6.4 and 6.8. Article 6.4 of the Paris Agreement outlines a carbon market mechanism that will allow the sale of carbon credits between entities. And this participation in this mechanism by states is voluntary and allows direct involvement from non-state actors like Indigenous peoples, but also private companies. And what this supervisory body is responsible for is develop recommendations and rules for this carbon market. Right now, there's a deadline for submissions, which is open until September 15 for opinions on several issues, including Indigenous peoples' implementation of participation. This particularly relative to paragraph 31E and independent grievance mechanism. This is an opportunity for Indigenous people to start talking about that. And under Article 6, there's also Article 6.8, which covers non-market approaches to carbon emission reduction. What we have been able to secure is that during COP28, so in Dubai, there will be roundtables will be held on non-market approaches, so countries helping each other in terms of reducing carbon emissions. And focus areas will include Indigenous peoples and the participation of Indigenous peoples in these non-market approaches. And on this particular 6.8 non-market approach, again, these are also open for submissions, which is open until September 18 on the key elements for this framework on non-market approaches. Then we have a loss and damage fund, which is now being discussed. Indigenous peoples are seeking equitable, direct, and simplified access from Indigenous peoples from all regions, so not just from the developing countries, but also from the developed countries. And we're seeking ways to interpret or expand the scope of the loss and damage fund so that Indigenous peoples can tap into it, regardless where they live or where they are situated. And that conversation is going to be continuing from SBSTA 58 until COP and beyond as well. And there's a major decision expected in COP. And then there's a Santiago network on loss and damage, which is a network of supply and demand in terms of expertise. In these people's position is that we can provide expertise as part of the Santiago network. It is going to be operationalized. It will be governed by an advisory board, and there is an opportunity for Indigenous peoples to be participating in the advisory board. And the UNFCCC has asked parties to nominate their members to the advisory board by November 15, and it is expected that they will be endorsed or at COP, which means the for this advisory board needs to be nominated as well. And let me close by saying that the sole responsibility of this person would be to ensure that inclusivity and continuity processes in providing this technical assistance, and that it's focused on communities, including Indigenous peoples, and that to ensure that the network respects the rights of Indigenous peoples. And we've been able to include that into the negotiations as a terms of reference. So this particular person will need to include that into his or her work package. That is briefly what I could share in 5 minutes. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano Ghazali.
Thank you very much, Brother Ghazali. Thank you for the information. And thank you for sharing this with our brothers and sisters, and hopefully they can join in with these participation to provide nominations, to participate in this work related to loss and damages, and to prepare for our work for the next upcoming COP on these subjects. Next, we're going to move on to the issues related to just transition, also related to climate change. And we will give the floor to our sister Andrea Carmen for Rogion Solisiga, who's been working on this issue. You have the floor, Andrea. Go ahead.
Chokwe Utesia, warm greetings to everybody. Rodian Suliandiska, who was my fellow member of the facilitative working group for what's called Local Communities Indigenous Peoples Platform, which is a constituted body of states and Indigenous peoples in equal number, addressing especially the contributions of Indigenous peoples through our knowledge systems, practices, original sciences, and cultural ways of life into the issue of climate change. He's traveling today, coming back actually from the meetings in Germany, and asked me to update you on a new area, because I'll just say that one of the areas that I follow in particular, working with Ghazali and others in a small team, I want to recognize also the leadership of Ghazali, and hope he puts his email in the chat so people can reach him. He helps to coordinate our work addressing Article 6, which again, was not something we really wanted in the Paris Agreement, but it got in there because the states, pushed for it to talk about issues of both market and non-market mechanisms for reducing climate change. But we also work on the upcoming issue, which has become very predominant in the discussions at the UN Framework Convention on Climate Change regarding loss and damage. And part of what we've emphasized there, and we had a very good side event that just happened in Bonn with members of what's called the Warsaw International Mechanism on Loss and Damage Executive Committee, to really have a chance for the first time for all 7 regions of Indigenous peoples to talk about our perspectives on loss and damage, and emphasizing prevention, because they're talking about funding loss and damage, but many of our losses, when you talk about our culture, our rights, even our land base for a lot of coastal and island peoples, can't be compensated with any amount of money. So we'll really want to steer the conversation in terms of prevention and participation, as Ghazali mentioned, but also respect for our rights and our knowledge systems as major contributors, not just, you know, what they call vulnerable groups or victims, but contributors and participants. So we were really happy the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change, which is known as the Indigenous Caucus, representing Indigenous peoples from all 7 of our regions. We're very pleased that for the first time at the Bonn Climate Talks, the SBSTA 58, there was a workshop on what's called just transition, because that's really a prevention based focus. But we were also allowed to speak and make a statement on behalf of the caucus. And I'm presenting this on behalf of Rodian, because one real concern that we have that we raised when we presented there with the countries was the issue of just transition. What does that mean? What does just mean regarding Indigenous peoples' perspectives? And what does transition mean? We know they're talking about moving away from fossil fuels. We're all for that. But if a real concern that Rodian is working on and forming an international coalition, and he's from Indigenous representative from the Russia region, is the issue of the transition minerals. And our view is if mining for lithium, say for electric car batteries, is being imposed in Indigenous people's territories, it really isn't a transition from gold mining or coal mining. You know, our rights have to be preserved in this area. And the same is, you know, what is just? Indigenous peoples don't want windmills put on our sacred mountains either, you know, without our free, prior, informed consent. So all of these elements can be brought up and are being brought up. And I just want to say, I can put Rodian's email in the chat as well, or maybe Roberto can do that for me. He's organizing an international summit next year on the issue specifically of transition minerals. And we need to be very proactive right now, because this is just a beginning discussion among the states on defining the criteria for what is just and what is a real transition, not just imposing mining of these new minerals on our lands, whether it be copper, lithium, or others that are part of this targeting for transition away from fossil fuels. So with that, I'll end. And I think it's very important that we all understand what's happening with some of these transition proposals. That's why I think Ghazali's mention of the grievance mechanism is very important, and that the criteria for these projects must be based on the rights of Indigenous peoples, as well as respect for our knowledge and ways of life. So I will end there, and please, anyone interested in this topic, get in touch with me or with Ghazali or with Rodian, specifically moving into planning for an International Indigenous Peoples Conference focused on impacts of transition mining. Thank you. Chokwe.
Muchísimas gracias, estimada Andrea, y bueno, gracias también a Rodion. Esperemos que llegue con bien su viaje. Efectivamente ya estuvo.
Thank you very much, Andrea, and of course, thank you also very much to Rodion. We hope he is traveling, and we hope he is, arrives well from his trip to Germany. Thank you very much for sharing this information. Also, the issues related to agriculture are very important, and we have experts on this issue. Johnson Cerda has been working on the Agriculture Committee in Coronivia, and this is also related to food sovereignty and the right to food. And so we've asked our brother Johnson to join us and share his report on this issue. Johnson, you have the floor. Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me? Is the presentation on the screen? we can see your
email.
emails. You can see, we see your screen, but we're not. Wait, let me change. Let me fix this. Okay, give me a second. Here we go. Okay, now here it is. Yes, there it is.
All right, you want me to do it in English? Vamos a hacer así. Okay. Okay, just I like to start saying that the discussion of agriculture doesn't come from the Paris Agreement. That's the first thing we need to understand, because sometimes we believe that is something decided that, under the Paris Agreement. This comes before that, and this is what I want to show you, that the first discussion or the first decision taken under the convention was in 2011 in Durban, you know, when the ad hoc working group on long-term cooperative action under the convention decided that, okay, SBSTA now work on issues related to agriculture with the aim to exchange views. So it was an invitation to start the discussion on agriculture in 2011. The Paris Agreement is 2015, so that's why I'm saying that it was done before. So they started there with several workshops with different participants to see the views of different key actors on agriculture. And then they end up with the Coronibia joint work on agriculture in 2017, as you can see there. It was a decision taken in 2017 in the COP23 in order to work on, modalities of implementation. As you can see, there are methods and approach for assessing adaptation, improved soil carbon, a lot of technical issues, right? They wanted to see how they can connect the discussion on agriculture with the mitigation and also adaptation topics. So that's why they implemented a series of workshops in order to come up with something. And the conclusion is that in those two, the previous, call to discuss on the views on agriculture and this one on the Coronibia work, they didn't get like a consensus in something. That's why they have now decided to start with a new program called the Sharm el-Sheikh Joint Work on Implementation on Climate Action on Agriculture and Food Security. So they added the food security this time in their work program. And this is for 4 years. And the main objective, as you can see, is promote the holistic approach in agriculture and food security, enhance synergies, collaboration, and partnership, providing technical advice to the parties, and also enhancing research, evaluating the progress of the discussion on agriculture, and sharing information and knowledge on agriculture. So this is what it was decided last year at COP27. And also in this decision, they have identified some elements, key elements. For instance, one is identify the topics to work on the series of workshops. I don't call it series, like 2 or 3 workshops that they're going to implement. So the idea is, it was that, okay, let's identify what are the main topics to include there. So at this point, based on the submission, they have more than 100 topics, and the mandate is now to decide on 3 topics. I don't know how they're going to get that, end up deciding 3 topics, but because they have hundreds of topics proposed to deal in the upcoming workshops. Also, the synthesis report is a mandate to make a synthesis report about the discussion on agriculture under the convention and also outside. So this is something also the members need to have a discussion to make a decision what exactly is going to go in this synthesis report. In session workshops, there's no discussion on that. It's 2 or 3 workshops that they're going to implement where we are invited to participate as Indigenous peoples. And also they are creating a web portal in order to exchange initiatives and projects about agriculture. What is going on now in SBSTA? Just 2 weeks ago, or just last week. So having this mandate from the COP27, they had to make a decision on how they're going to be implementing that decision. And it was very complicated because there was no agreement between the parties in the topics. And EU and G77, they end up with a draft text which was proposed to the facilitators, and the facilitators came up with this text and other, notes, and they have a draft conclusion where they included that some of the topics, for instance, the coordination group, because the G77 is requesting to create a coordination group, to create a new, coordination group to move forward the discussion on agriculture. And most of the parties are saying that why we should create another working group, another group to deal with this, because we have already this working group with the participation of parties and observers as well. So that's one of the topics that they don't agree. The other one is in these draft conclusions, they have included terms like fisheries and blue food as part of the discussion in the coming up workshops. And some groups are saying that, some parties, they are saying that they disagree with the inclusion of this topic as fisheries and blue food. And some are saying that this is part of the food security, but it's not agriculture. So that is the discussion that they still are having. And also about sustainable agriculture approach. That is something that is not clear. Mostly Europeans are pushing for this, but G77, I think, is not in favor of this topic. So finally, what about the indigenous peoples in this discussion? In the draft conclusions of the co-facilitators, they have included, the views of indigenous peoples, the need to include the view of indigenous peoples. Also, they are encouraging to include the indigenous traditional ecological knowledge. That is a wording that is in this draft conclusion. And also, they're encouraging the parties to take into consideration indigenous people when they are preparing submission and also during the workshops. So it was encouraged in that draft decision, but I wanted to mention something also about the decision taken in COP27. In this main decision, they include two things about indigenous peoples. The first one in the paragraph 10 is, they are encouraging to increase the effort to promote sustainable agriculture by strengthening the role of indigenous peoples. So that is clear in the mandate coming from the COP27, which is something that we need to implement in the workshops coming up soon. And also, it's encouraging the UN organizations, relevant institutions to strengthen cooperation, in particular with women, children, youth, indigenous peoples, and local communities. Some of the European countries, they are saying that indigenous people should take advantage of this decision to fundraise in order to have money to prepare something to come up for the future workshops that we're going to have. So this is what I have, and the invitation for indigenous peoples is open in this discussion. Usually the co-facilitators, they request our intervention in order to include indigenous people's topics in the decisions, in the conclusions. And that's why we've been always proposing something. And thanks to Saul, he also managed to take the floor and present the statement in behalf of the indigenous peoples there with some of the topics that we consider is important to include in this language that they are working for the implementation of the activities. So finally, workshops are coming up soon, and we should be ready for that and have our positions for those topics that they are going to make a decision. And there was no agreement basically in SBSTA, and they said that the only decision was this discussion will continue at COP28. So that's the conclusion. With that, I would like to thank you for the invitation, Saul.
Muchas gracias, estimado Johnson.
Thank you so much, Johnson, for being here and sharing that important, useful information. And thank you so much for your leadership on this topic of agriculture, and also Oneline and Roxana that were participating as youth on this topic that is so important to us. Once again, thank you. And now to close this topic on the updates on climate change issues, now we will have the participation of the role of Indigenous youth at the UNFCCC process. And the youth played a very important part that attended SBSTA 58 in Bonn. And so now we've asked our brother Oneline Macerdule to give us an update on what happened there during these 2 weeks of work of SBSTA 58. And so now please share with us the role of Indigenous youth in the UNFCCC process. Good day to all of you. Can you hear me? Well, first of all, I want to thank all of you, all of these experts that have shared the information during this 2 weeks of work. And thank you so much, Ghazali and Johnson, everybody that participated there and participated in something that's very important that we're going to talk about today is the very important role of Indigenous youth in this process. And based on this, I think it's important for us to take on this responsibility and to get involved in this space and to do this in a very full and an effective way. It's very important to know where we're going to direct our energy, what path we're going to take, and what topics we're going to deal with. Because one of the difficulties that we saw during these 2 weeks of participation, one was to get involved in this. I'm sorry, he has a bad connection. That there wasn't a lot of role for us to, opportunities for us to play. How can we strengthen our role there as the Indigenous youth? So there were social, cultural meetings. We got involved. We shared our experience because some of us have more experience. Others were there for the first time in these really technical spaces. And well, at the end of the day, language is really important. And they were talking about the UN Convention Framework on Climate Change. So for us, it was really important. We sat down and we did like a study of how many youth were participating at SBSTA 58 in Bonn. And then we want to offer some results that we came up with. And something that really surprised me is that they had 15 bilateral meetings as Indigenous peoples, as representatives, as experts as well. But there was still a lack of knowledge of how to do bilateral meetings. But because of the expertise of other representatives, we were able to attend a meeting like with the co-presidency for COP28 and also the high-level champions for the upcoming meetings in Dubai. So there we were able to share our perspectives as Indigenous youth and what is going on in our communities. It's so important to listen to us as youth and our perspective because we are the first ones to feel the impact of climate change. We are resilient, but we have to really continue this worldwide struggle. So I think we did have some good results. And so for COP28, the presidency offered us a space there at the IP Pavilion, a space for the youth. So we will have support there. We will be able to be there every day, and we will be able to participate in those meetings at the IP Pavilion. And another good result that we had on the decisions that were made within SBSTA 58, as Indigenous youth, we have to create a working group under the umbrella of Indigenous Peoples Forum on Climate Change. What does that mean? So that means that we're on a route, on a path to create strategies for Indigenous youth, how we will participate there, using SBSTA 58 as a starting point, going to COP28. It can be in working groups, or it can be in a coordination of the 7 regions, how we will share our contributions and how we can do this together, and to offer in an official way at COP28 to show that we are a strong group of Indigenous peoples, and we're based, Indigenous youth group based on climate change. And Andrea also shared about the just transition. This topic is so important. The framework of Convention on Climate Change is being used by different countries to use extractive industries, but as Indigenous youth, we need to share this information to the next generation so that we can know how to face these problems intergenerationally. And then when we talked about adaptation, just transition, and we learned a lot from other experts, those of you that were there, have been there for many, many years, and how to do this work in a holistic way. And in this process, we were able to capture all this information and to also share our contributions within these negotiations. And well, and thank you so much to all of the youth that participated at SBSTA 58 and those that want to participate in the future. In this working group, I'm going to share with you my email here and also my phone number. So all the 7 regions, all the Indigenous youth, you can add your contributions and participate in this working group as we go on the path to COP28. Thank you. Thank you, my dear brother Onelin. Thank you so much for this important work and for the Indigenous youth and for this process of food sovereignty. We have to reinforce the participation of the Indigenous youth. And so with that, we will close the topic of climate change. And now we will move on to another very important topic. And this is the recent UN Water Conference, where there was also an Indigenous Peoples pre-summit and coalition work. And there we had a lot of very important work that took place. And for this, we ask our brother Prem Singh Taru for AIPP, for the Indigenous Peoples Global Coalition, so that he can give us an update on this. And Roberto Borrero is the alternate, so they're both here. So Prem, you have the floor.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this opportunity. Actually, UN Water Conference, it held in March from 22 to 24 of the March, and Indigenous Peoples Spirit Summit, that was our Indigenous Peoples Coalition work we did prior to the water conference. So the UN 2023 water conference had the 5 targeted thematic areas. One was water for health, second was water for development, third was water for climate resilience and environment, fourth was water for cooperation, and fifth was water action decade. So focusing on these 5 targeted thematic areas, we Indigenous Peoples, we gather at the Newark, and as for our good coalition, good collaboration, good cooperation, we could organize Indigenous Peoples Spirit Summit, and that Spirit Summit was really very important preparatory meeting for our Indigenous Peoples prior to the UN Water Conference. So our Indigenous Peoples Spirit Summit, it was held on 20 and 21 March. And we are very thankful to International Indian Treaty Council, who took the lead to organize these Indigenous Peoples Spirit Summit. And in that leadership, we 5 organizations were the co-sponsors, along with International Indian Treaty, means Assembly of First Nations, United Confederation of Taino People, the Center for Support of Indigenous Peoples of Northern Russia, the Indigenous Peoples of Africa Coordinating Committee, and Asia Indigenous People Pact. And pre-summit, produced Indigenous Peoples Declaration for the UN 2023 Water Conference, encompassing 6 recommendations along with Indigenous Peoples' commitment to the UN Water Conference. The declaration was signed and endorsed by 73 Indigenous Peoples organizations plus 2 other supporting organizations. The collective efforts and coalition work of Indigenous Peoples were very visible in the conference. UN 2023 Water Conference, New York, was held, I said, on 22, 23, and 24 March. The government of Netherlands, through its agency called Netherlands Enterprise Agency, RPO, had provided a stakeholder engagement fund to some of the Indigenous Peoples organizations, including other CSOs. And Indigenous Peoples organizations had space for the joint special events, including in-persons and virtual events. So IPOs could successfully organize more than 10 events and contributed to many other events as a speaker and panelist. So the very important things that we need to highlight from the UN Water Conference are, so the summary report of the 2023 UN Water Conference has separately used the term Indigenous Peoples. If you see the executive summary, page number 5, you can find here Indigenous Peoples separately. There is also use local communities, but it is separated from the local communities. Why it is important to separate Indigenous peoples from the local communities? Because we Indigenous peoples are distinct. We are not local communities. Means we don't have any different opinions or the agitating opinions against the local communities. But we are doing the advocacy for our own rights, of our own identity. So it's very important to have the separate identity as Indigenous peoples. If we raise this issue in different UN forums, the state parties, they say IPLC, either it is in climate change or biodiversity process, it is always used IPLC. And if you raise it, they say it is already established term. We can understand it is established term, but you cannot undermine our identity. So we are the responsible to do the advocacy of our identity, where we pride to be the Indigenous peoples. Means we deserve to do the advocacy of our Indigenous peoples' identity. So always we should be very, we should be very straightforward to do the advocacy, to be separate from Indigenous, to be separate as Indigenous peoples, not together with IPLC. So if you see the outcome documents of the conference in its summary report, Indigenous peoples, it is separated. And this means in the summary report, you can also see critical challenges, page number 13. There is also used in Indigenous peoples. And if you go down in the report, there is interactive dialogue section in the report, page number 17. There is also used Indigenous practices. And if you see in the summary report, key message of the interactive dialogues, page number 22, there is also used the knowledge of Indigenous peoples, the knowledge of Indigenous communities. And if you see the key ideas and proposals of the interactive dialogues, page number 23, there is also local communities, then Indigenous peoples. And very good thing is that in the summary report, it is acknowledged and respected to the Indigenous people's participation in the closing plenary, page 23. There is said, next, the Vice President of the World Economic Forum, Vice President of the African Development Bank, the Chief Executive Officer of BEAR, the Mayor of the Freetown, Sierra Leone, and a representative of Indigenous community were invited on the stage to share their views on the conference. So if you see all this scenario and all these strengths in the report, then we can say that we Indigenous peoples have been well recognized in the UN 2023 Water Conference. But that's not enough, because this UN Water Conference is for effective implementation of the water action water decade action agenda. So there is very important to have our effective participation along with the partnership of Indigenous peoples for protection of the water resources, and our Indigenous knowledge, our practices, are very strong, tools to combat the water pollutions, to mitigate the water crisis and safeguarding of the biodiversity, natural resources and ecosystem. So our indigenous knowledge and practices, our indigenous governance practices and water resources are very important for the water action agenda. So as we indigenous peoples, we should not merge our identity with the local communities, because in the name of local communities we are being undermined. And when it comes the issue of the matter of free, prior and informed consent, and in that process indigenous peoples they are boycott, they are skipped, and they are not consulted for a single stage of single process of free, prior and informed consent. And in our land and territories, if there are other community people, so consultation is only done with them, and then it is said means free, prior informed consent, it has been completed. So if you go in the in the document, you don't find the participation of indigenous peoples, means the consultation with the indigenous peoples. That's why it's very important, means in the water related developments, that free, prior informed consent with the indigenous peoples must be secured, must be exercised. But if we accept the IPLC, then we cannot say that means free, prior consultation was done without participation of the indigenous peoples. That's why our distinguished identity, our distinguished means participation, our separate participation, our meaningful and effective participation must be as indigenous peoples, not as IPLC. So the colleagues I'm seeing here, we are from different backgrounds and working in different thematic areas. So wherever we work, we should have to always raise that we indigenous people are different. We are not the IPLC, means we are not the local communities. So indigenous peoples must be separated. So if you see these summary documents of the UN Water Conference, it has completely separated to indigenous peoples from the local communities. So that we should really appreciate of this UN water process. So this spirit we should gear off in other UN mechanisms and process. And then I'm very thankful to our brother Roberto, who was doing the coordination of all these our indigenous peoples pre-summit, and our sister Andrea, who was leading the whole process as the pillar of the International Indian Treaty Council, and our colleagues who were providing really very brilliant support of the coordination as well as interpretation. So thank you very much for this opportunity. If you have anything, please feel free to ask. Our brother Roberto is here, our sister Andrea is here, and our other colleagues are also here. So we'll be very happy to respond to your queries. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano Prem. Gracias por todo ese arduo trabajo.
Thank you very much to our brother Prem for all of this hard work and for presenting this report on the work that is ongoing and the upcoming work on the UN water issues. Please share your contact information in the chat so that anyone who has questions can contact you directly. Now, we will move on to our next subject. This is a very important issue. It's an issue related to food, to climate change, and everything, really. And it is related to the FAO's work in handling the amendments to the International Code of Conduct on Pesticides. Under Carmen and a group of representatives of different organizations have done very important work on this. We also have with us representative of the UNFAO Pesticides Management Division, Gu Baojin from the FAO, who's been working to promote this work over many years. And so I will now give the floor to Andrea and Mr. Gu to discuss this important work that's taking place related to pesticides. Go ahead. Thank you.
And thank you, Saul Chokwe-Otesia, and thank you also, Saul, for your leadership on this issue over many years. I'm going to go back even to 2001, when we hosted in the International Indian Treaty Council office the very first and newly established mandate of United Nations Special Rapporteur. Was called a very long name, something like human rights impacts of the illegal transport of hazardous materials. Now, thank goodness, that mandate is just called the UN Special Rapporteur on Toxics and Human Rights. And my brother, compadre Paco, talked about the visit of the current mandate holder to Rio Yaqui and how important his interaction with the fisheries cooperative of Rio Yaqui, which is an area we usually think of pesticides in agriculture and don't really talk about it in terms of fisheries and total food systems. But when Madam Wichi Vaseli visited us, we had Indigenous peoples there impacted by pesticides from our Yaqui communities in northern Mexico, from Guatemala, from Alaska, where these things travel through the environment, even though they're not used there, and many other places. And we found out two things that were quite shocking to us at that time. I don't know whether they should have been shocking, but they were. We were already looking at the birth defects and cancer rates in our Yaqui communities, and midwives talking about what they were seeing, things that they'd never seen before when they were delivering the babies. And but she told us two things. She was on an official visit to the United States, and she used the United States as an example of countries that actually manufacture pesticides that they have prohibited for use in their own countries because they're known to cause birth defects and cancer, but yet this is legal under international law, but not just federal law, but the Rotterdam Convention of the United Nations allows this practice. And so many of the pesticides being used in Rio Yaqui and other places, Guatemala, all over the place, affecting Indigenous peoples severely in terms of reproductive health, women's health, and future generations, were actually banned by the countries that were exporting them to these areas. And so we've been working really ever since then to address this issue internationally as a major human rights violation that is permitted by United Nations conventions, which is a major contradiction for us. We've taken it to the United Nations Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues, where they were the first UN body to recognize the issue of what's called environmental violence, including the deliberate and knowing and informed use of toxic substances that are known to be dangerous is a form of environmental violence that we see. And we're very gratified that the new general comment of the Convention for the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women recognized environmental violence. We presented on this to them at their request last year, and they accepted it. So we're very happy for that it's becoming recognized. But we've been looking at how to impact this internationally. And again, as Saul said, I'm very gratified that finally, after all these years, more than 20 years of working on this, a body that is made up of the UN Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Health Organization as coordinators, called the Joint Meeting on Pesticides Management, invited us to come and present our proposals for an actual change of the content of the international code of conduct on pesticide management. And in November in Rome, FAO hosted the meeting. Saul and I attended and presented the human rights impacts of pesticide use on Indigenous peoples and our proposals based on Article 29 of the UN Declaration on Rights of Indigenous Peoples, which mandates free prior informed consent of Indigenous peoples before hazardous materials can be used in our territories. Of course, that is violated every day and every moment, but there was actually a resolution from this official UN body to consider and to change and amend the International Code of Conduct on Pesticides, which then impacts the way the Rotterdam Convention is implemented, and basing those amendments on our proposals relating to the rights of Indigenous peoples and human rights. A lot of times we see at the UN that environment, same with climate change and all these conventions, is considered over here and human rights is over there. And it's very important to us, as we've heard on climate change, that these issues are beginning to be merged and to understand the relationship. And so one thing that we are doing at FAO's request is currently we're developing a guidance document on Indigenous peoples and pesticides, the impacts, the rights involved, and using that as a basis for working towards this amendment of the FAO Code of Conduct on Pesticides, of the International Code of Conduct on Pesticides. We've been having input into it over years, but right now, one of our consulting attorneys, Managakuk Magnuson, who's Mayan from Belize, is working on the next steps. And this is a very important message that I have for you. If your organization or your people are impacted or have a special interest in participating in this, once we get a basic fundamental draft, we're going to be disseminating it and asking for input. If you would like to be on this review or drafting committee with us, please put your name in the chat. So that's my message to you. This is in process now. This is a huge advance. The UN Permanent Forum on Indigenous Issues has endorsed this process and recognized it as a real victory, not just in general for the rights of Indigenous peoples work at the UN, but in the impacts it can actually have on our women, on our children, on our families, on our agricultural workers, on our babies and unborn generations on the ground in our territories. So please put your name on the chat if you're interested in being part of this team for the development of this guidance note and being part of this work. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias.
Thank you so much, Andrea, for all the work that you have been doing for so many years. And fortunately, now we are seeing some results and some good results from the UNFAO and other UN organizations. So thank you. Now we have Mr. Gu Baogen from the UNFAO Pesticides Management Division, and we can see what kind of different results were adopted at the last meeting. You now have the floor, Mr. Gu.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Very happy to attend this meeting. As Andrea said, that they have worked on more than 10 years. It's really important issues. We have discussed with Andrea and her community association. So next, Andrea already provided this background information. Next, I will briefly introduce the current status of the issues. So as Andrea said that FAO and WHO have many meetings on these important issues. And most importantly, in last year, Andrea was attended the 5th FAO-WHO joint meeting on pesticide amendment. And she presented the impacts of pesticide to health and the environment of indigenous people and community, and present a proposal for inclusion of references to indigenous people in the code of conduct. Yeah. Then the champion meeting make 2 recommendations. First, initiation of the process of revision of code of conduct on pesticide amendment, taking account issues such as indigenous people and human rights. Secondly, to propose the development of separate FAO-WHO guidance document on risk communication and on regulations of pesticide in indigenous people and territory. Why? Because the revision of the code of conduct will take long time. The process is complicated. However, developing the guidelines will be much quicker and easier, normally in 2 or 3 years. And the guidelines will provide concrete policy and regulatory and technical guidance on how to manage the pesticide amendment in indigenous people and minimize the risks of pesticide to human health, environment in indigenous peoples. And the IITC technical working group has worked on the guidelines development. It is an outline developed by FAO, and the IITC working group has started the drafting. And in last month, FAO and IITC, mainly Andrea Carmen, had a meeting, make below 3 decisions. First, GMPN and IITC will lead the process of and development of the guidance. Second, ICCTC with working group, together with support of GMPN working group, will develop the 2 documents. Third, we should have inclusive participatory approach and the process in which we will consult all 7 regional indigenous communities and all relevant stakeholders, including national pesticide management agencies. Because after launching of the guidance, especially after revision of the code of conduct, National Pesticide Management Agency should update the national laws and regulations on pesticide, especially have separate sessions on indigenous people. Yeah. And regarding the next step, as discussed, reference for the code of conduct. So the technical working group, together with GMPN, will conduct a global survey and a field visit to collect inputs and comments from indigenous community along the world. Andrea already called for your inputs, comments, to these issues. And you are welcome to have engagement in the process. I hope I can join, Andrea, I hope I can join some field visit to know the real situation of pesticide impacts and the management. Then we can develop good references and the guidance. Then we draft the references, and the GMPN will discuss and finalize the references, and then included in the code of conduct for approval of FAO-WHO governing bodies. They are developing the guidance on pesticide management and indigenous peoples. It's agreed that in the July, GMPN secretary and the IITC technical working group will discuss the guidelines and approaches of drafting. Second, it's a hope that the first draft will be ready for 2023 GMPM meeting discussion in November this year. After that, we will conduct a wide consultation others and 7 indigenous regions and the national agencies. Yeah, and before first intersessional GMPM meetings in next year. Then the intersessional meetings of GMPS will discuss the draft, and then it's hoped that we can get endorsement in 2024 GMPM in November. Yeah. So after endorsement, we can publish it. Yeah. But the time is really constrained. Yeah. So others, FAO will submit information in July 2023, yeah, early next month. In addition, FAO are going to organize an international conference of chemical measurement, the 5th session in September 2023. Presentation on highly hazardous pesticide impacts and the importance of revising code of conduct. So these are updates. Let's work together. During this meeting, I noticed that pesticides are widely used and impacts the resulting in the death of the fish and have impacts of the food system in indigenous people. So I'm sorry to hear it. We have take concrete and radical action to protect indigenous people from pesticide. Thank you very much for your attention.
Muchísimas gracias, señor Gu. Muchas gracias por esta hoja de ruta que nos ha
Thank you
planteado.
very much. Thank you, Mr. Gu, for presenting this important information about the roadmap to move forward on concrete steps to protect indigenous peoples' territories from the harms caused by pesticides. Thank you very much for your support, and we shall continue to work jointly with you. Thank you. Thank you very much. Now, at this point, we have essentially finished our updates on all of the different subjects that our International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty is working on. As you can hear, there is a lot of ongoing work. There is much work that remains to be done, but there are also some important progress has been made. So I would like to really thank our sister Andrea. I would like to thank all of our brothers and sisters, our panelists who have shared important information. Thank you for your leadership on all of these issues. And now we also have some announcements about some upcoming events, and we would like to share that information with you now. We will ask our brother Chili Yazi to share some information about the 6th International Corn Conference, Indigenous Peoples Corn Conference. You have 2 minutes. Brother Chili Yazi, you have the floor. Thank you.
Thank you, mi hermano Raul, and greetings to all my relatives on the call. The 6th Indigenous Corn Conference, corn gathering is scheduled for August 27 through August 31 here in Shiprock on my homelands here on our farm. And we would ask all of the participants to schedule to come in on the 27th on a Sunday On Monday, we will have a cultural day. We want to share much of our culture with all of our brothers and sisters who journey to our homeland. We will have an interaction between all of our indigenous cooks, hopefully even with cooks from Guatemala. But we want to develop a corn cookbook that we want everybody to go home with. That evening, we will have a harvest ceremony. We will bring all of our produce together and celebrate the harvest that evening, the 28th. On the 29th and 29th and 30th, we will have our reports, our updates on all of the issues that we are confronting. And we want to present some of the issues that we are contending with here in our home country. The evening of the 30th, we want to do a ceremony for the Earth Mother, where we want to bring all of our knowledge holders, all of our medicine people, those that have song and prayer, to make one voice to give strength to and appreciation and respect and honor to our Earth Mother. And we will be all going home the next day on the 31st. We hope to see you all here. You are all very welcome. Thank you.
Muchísimas gracias, hermano Chili. Gracias por esta
Thank you
invitación.
very much, my brother Chili. Thank you for that invitation. Now you've all heard that the invitation is out to you all. So let's prepare to attend, those of us who can attend this important event. And it's very important for the work that we are carrying out on this issue. The next issue is an announcement from our brother Anders Oskal regarding the important work on the reindeer and caribou in the Arctic Food Systems Conference. Anders, you have the floor, brother. We give the floor to our brother Anders.
I'm not sure that Anders was able to join. He told me he had some family concerns, but he asked me just to give a brief update. I'm not a Arctic food systems person, but this has been something that a group of us, including with support from IATC with our Arctic members from Alaska and Canada, have been working on with the Samis to hold a caribou and reindeer food systems event. And it had to be postponed a couple of times, first because of COVID and then because of the war situation. But they're looking at organizing it in January of this coming year. It has to be in between when they're working on the reindeer. It's going to be in the traditional reindeer herding area of Norway, Sami territory. So the best thing to do is put your info in the chat, and maybe Roberto can put the contact of Chief Bill Erasmus, Chief Gary Harrison, and Anders Oskal of the World Reindeer Herders Association in the chat if you want more information. But hopefully before it gets too close to January, we'll have another one of these gatherings. We try to have them quarterly, and we can have him or one of the organizers on to talk more in detail about it. Thank you.
Muchas gracias, estimada Andrea. Bueno,
Thank you very much to our esteemed Andrea, and we regret that we don't have Anders Oskal here to share more direct information with us. We know he's working on this event, and we look forward to hearing more information through our list. And as we reach the conclusion of this meeting, as you've been hearing, the different subjects that we are dealing with in this International Indigenous Peoples Food Sovereignty Forum. We're talking about food sovereignty, but as we can see, food sovereignty is related to so many issues related to, for example, loss of soil, the loss of our territories, climate change, loss of biodiversity, the loss of glaciers. And at the end of the day, all of these things affect our indigenous peoples, and all of these things affect our food as indigenous people. So we ask you to join with us in this important work. As we see, we have had important advances. However, there are many areas that are lacking. We've had important relationship with Mr. Gu, and we seek a better relationship with the FAO. So we believe it would be good to have our next meeting focus specifically on this subject. What are the strategies that we can develop so that the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty may have official recognition by FAO like the other international caucuses? There is the International Indigenous Peoples Caucus on Climate Change, the International Indigenous Peoples Caucus on Biodiversity that are recognized within those UN summit procedures, but we are lacking that within the FAO. So we would seek for the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty to play that role. And at our next meeting, we would like to discuss that issue, the strategy, but only that subject related to that strategy. If we can dedicate an hour and a half or 2 hours of meeting to focus only on that without other issues and updates. So we're putting that on the floor to see if you all agree. We see all of the agendas that have been presented by all of our distinguished panelists, and we would like for each of you to check your schedules to see when you would be available for this next meeting of the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty to discuss this question of being recognized as an official caucus within the FAO processes. So perhaps those of you who would like to make a comment can raise your hand, and we can see about when we, if you agree, you can raise your hand. You raise your hand if you agree about dedicating this next meeting to this subject of focusing on the strategy for the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty to achieve a caucus status with the FAO. I would ask if you can share your feelings with us, or if anyone is opposed to this, if you please can let us know. Let us know in the chat, or raise your hand if you agree with this proposal by using the raise your hand tool. I see Rochelle, I see Roxana, Frank, Andrea, Rochelle, all raising their hand, showing their agreement with this proposal. Juan Leon has raised his hand, Janine, our brother Chile also. So I see Roberto also. So thank you very much. Thank you also to our brother, our sister Tadina Arias, Anaru Fraser and Natalia have also raised their hands. Anaru and Claudia, I see raising their hands. So thank you very much. I think this shows a consensus. We have also Roldan and Claudia Carinarias have raised their hands. So with this, I believe we have this consensus, and I would like to thank you for your agreement and your willingness for us to work on this next meeting, work on a consensus on this topic. Also, thank you, Musali. Thank you for sharing with us, everyone. And we would like now to move on to the subject of setting our next meeting for the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty, and where we can discuss all of this work, this ongoing work, how we're doing with our organization, with our work, with the COP, with the questions related to the code of conduct, and just to reflect a bit on all of this updates we've received on such important work that's going on, we will give the floor now to our sister Janine for a summary conclusion. Thank you, Janine. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Saul, for moderating so beautifully and moving us through all of these very important updates and discussions. Sorry, I heard a little bit of feedback. So as it becomes clear with all of our presenters here today, there's a lot of work and opportunities that lie before us. And it just goes to show what can be accomplished when we continue to strengthen our coordination and collaboration around developing strategies that integrate and work across several of the mechanisms and work that's being done with these different groups. And so another part that came up in the discussions is the importance of involving more of our youth and building those bridgeways, pathways to leadership so that we can, create those bridges necessary to bring our local issues and our community issues to these international discussions, because the strength of the outcomes are across the board have been informed by what is happening on the ground in our own communities, and by bringing in the expertise of our own people into these negotiations and into these processes to put forward recommendations that not only benefit us and our peoples, but that benefit all peoples and our Mother Earth and our sacred ecosystems that are continuously being threatened both by man-made activities, but also by the impacts of climate change. Like our brother said, Saul, it becomes clear whenever we come to these meetings that even though we are talking about food systems and water sovereignty, that everything becomes interconnected to these issues. And so look forward to how we can strengthen these coordination meetings to hone in on strategy. And so we'll just put forward a great proposal to start to do that with our next meeting. Just some notes. We will summarize a lot of the notes from the presentations, but the recording will also be sent to those that have registered. However, I know people absorb information differently. And so I have been taking notes throughout the duration of our time, and I will be summarizing the key dates and opportunities that were presented by the different experts that have joined us today, so that it can be easily accessible for those who wish to get involved. It will break down the opportunities, the mechanisms, the dates, and the contact for each of the opportunities that were presented by our relatives here. For the next meeting date, what is being proposed is September 9th, and that is again a Saturday. And I think we have honed in on a good time block that works for everyone. So it would be during the same time. And so we want to give, maybe we'll do the same process with that Saul did. If people could take a quick minute to check their calendars and give a thumbs up or hands up, or to say in the chat if September 9th works for them. I see hands up from Andrea, Anaru, Rochelle, Frank, Roberto, Chile, Yateishache. September 9th. Does September 9th work? Saul. Juan Leon said in the Q&A, it works for him. Okay, so we will continue to Nice. Thumbs up from Paco. All right, so it looks like we have critical mass in agreement that September 9th works. We will send out that save the date and again, preliminary agenda for that. Based on what was decided right before this, we will start off with discussing the formalization of this committee as a caucus recognized by FAO. What was also suggested in the chat and through discussions was that we include seed genetics protection as one of the points of discussion. So I think that would make up our agenda for our next meeting. And so thank you all again for taking time out of your Saturday to be part of these very important conversations.
Muchas gracias, hermana Janine.
Thank you so much, our sister Janine, for sharing this information, your closing reflections, and also for the next date for the next meeting. So now I want to thank all of you, each and every one of you. Those of you that asked your questions, we will have taken notes of your contact information and involve you in those tasks that you are interested in on seeds, diversity, etc. So we think that this is very important to have your expertise of each of you in order to strengthen the work that we do here and the International Indigenous Peoples Forum on Food Sovereignty. And so now I will ask for our brother Frank Edawajisik he's always here with us, and he can do the closing prayer to thank the Creator that allowed us to have this meeting. Our brother Frank, you have the floor.
Thank you. So I appreciate the opportunity to be here today and be with everyone. Ani, pipigwa dodem, waganak sing and donjaba, nakwe gijik, Indishnakas. Our hearts are filled with gratitude for all of the beings with whom we share this wonderful creation and all the gifts they share with us that sustain us physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. For the foods and the actions that they take, all of the food plants, all of the beings, the other plants that are here, the fishes, all those that sustain us, they fulfill their sacred duties. And they produce in abundance so that others can survive. And we are amongst those others that survive on their abundance. While they're fulfilling their sacred duties, it's important for us to be thinking about that. We ask the Creator for the strength to face the challenges we have in making sure that we do our sacred duties, that our sacred duties to protect these other beings, to keep them from harm, to allow them to continue on their sacred ways, that this is something that we need to be keeping in our hearts. We ask the Creator to help us keep those thoughts in our hearts and in our actions as we go through life. We're filled with gratitude for all the gifts that they bring, and ask that we honor and respect all of those that provide for our foods, the air we breathe, all these other beings with whom we share this natural world. Miigwet chendigo heya heya heyda heya heya heyda. 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 Miigwet. Oh, thank you.
Muchas gracias, hermano Frank, por esta invocación. Gracias por todo.
Thank you, our brother Frank. Thank you so much for your closing prayer. Thank you for the energy that you share with us and for always being with us. And with this, our brothers and sisters, we are now at the end of our meeting. It was a very productive meeting with a lot of information. and a lot of work that we have done with activities and many things that still await us of the many activities. And so we look forward to working with you again, and we want to carry out these coming meetings. Especially, I want to thank the co-coordinators, Anders Oskold, Janine Yazzie. So thank you very much. We'll see you next time. Thank you.
Bye, everybody.
Thank you, everyone. Bye-bye.
Thanks to our interpreters too,
Uh,
from all the languages. Thank you.
Yes.
Okay, bye.
Okay.
Thank you, Saul. Very
Bye,
good
everybody.
moderation. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay.